Thank you to the Kirk Center for organizing this conference. I'm very grateful. I'm honored to be here. My task today is to consider a question or a paradox that seems to have almost nothing to do with this conference. But I hope to convince you in about 15 minutes that this question is not only related to conservatism, but perhaps essential to it. The question, or the paradox, is the following. Of all three Abrahamic faiths, why is Judaism at once the most Promethean, that is, the friendliest to technological innovation, but also simultaneously the one that puts such a heavy emphasis on the Sabbath, which seems like a deeply anti-Promethean institution? My argument will be that these two sides of the Jewish tradition, far from being in tension, far from being a contradiction, are in fact intimately related. Judaism is Promethean because it is the faith of the Sabbath. It thinks of tradition and innovation not as two irreconcilable camps at war with each other, but as two poles oscillating in dialectic that never quite reaches a perfect synthesis. The role that the Sabbath plays in that dialectic, I want to argue, is the role of conservatism in modern Promethean societies. Now, for this argument, I'll have two guides, both of whom are rabbis. Soloveitchik, Joseph Soloveitchik, that is, and Abraham Joshua Heschel. The two are often considered opponents on the question of innovation, but I hope to show you that they are closer than they seem. Let's start with Soloveitchik. Perhaps his most famous work, The Lonely Man of Faith, begins with a tension at the beginning of Genesis that has long puzzled commentators. In Genesis 1, we read, "Fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over it." In Genesis 2, by contrast, we read, "And the eternal God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to serve it and to keep it." For Soloveitchik, these two chapters of Genesis are the different portraits of Adam, and by extension, two different portraits of the human being. In Genesis 1, man's likeness to God expresses itself in man's striving to become a creator. Adam the first, from Genesis 1, is fashioned in the image of God because he's blessed with great drive for creative activity. Adam the first represents the practical side of the human mind, focused on the how more than the why, on the workings of nature more than on its spiritual essence. More practical than metaphysical, Adam the first is overwhelmed by one quest, to harness and dominate the elemental forces of nature and to put them at his disposal. He wants to learn the secrets of nature, but only as a means to the end of domination. For Soloveitchik, Adam the first personifies what later becomes modern science. In short, Adam the first is a Promethean adventurer who explores nature for the sake of mastery. Soloveitchik does not pathologize Adam the first. Far from perverse or undesirable, the impulse to conquer nature fulfills the divine mandate to subdue the earth and have dominion over it. Following Francis Bacon, Soloveitchik claims that the human triumph over the cosmos is anything but impious. By reaching for distant stars, Adam the first acts in harmony with his nature, which was created, willed, and directed by his maker, a manifestation of obedience to, rather than a rebellion against, God. Those who abandon the conquest of the earth, then, betray that God-given purpose. Acting in harmony with human nature requires accepting our telos as masters of the earth. Yet Soloveitchik also admits that Adam the second, from Genesis 2, who serves and keeps the garden, personifies an altogether different disposition towards the world. Uninterested in domination, he does not attempt to create a world of his own, but seeks to understand the living, given world into which he has been cast. If Adam the first asks how, Adam the second asks why. His mode of reasoning is not instrumental but purposive, concerned with ends rather than means. While Adam the first anticipates the spirit of modern science, Adam the second anticipates the conservative reaction to it. Comfortable with mystery, he longs for wholeness and cosmic order. In Soloveitchik's portrait, Adam the second encounters the universe in all its color and splendor, quote, studying it with the naivete, awe, and admiration of the child who seeks the unusual and wonderful in every ordinary thing and event. While Adam the first honors God by exercising his creative powers, Adam the second seeks a closer union with the divine by means of prayer. For Soloveitchik, it's no coincidence that Adam the second is born out of dust. Formed from the dust of the ground, Adam II represents the humble origin of man. Where Adam the first is moved by relentless thirst for victory, Adam the second adopts a posture of humility and prostration. He searches for harmony with the heavens above, not mastery over the earth below. He sees nature not a boundless source of creation and power, but an intricate object of contemplation through which to encounter his maker. Where Adam the first transforms the world, Adam the second protects it. Adam the first is an architect of the future, Adam the second a guardian of the present. Now, what matters for our purposes is that Soloveitchik frames both Adams, the first and the second, as necessary and complementary parts of the human condition. In different ways, Adam the first and Adam the second fulfill the human telos. As Soloveitchik puts it, quote, both Adams want to be human, both strive to be themselves, to be what God commanded them to be, namely man. Yet this complementarity does not resolve the tension between the two Adams. The relationship between conquest and contemplation, between science and poetry, between mastery and humility, or between innovation and conservation, is never one of simple harmony. On the contrary, Soloveitchik admits that the contrast between the two Adams captures a paradox at the heart of the human condition. God tells men to quest for sovereignty over nature and to surrender to divine authority. He wants men to ask how and why, to interpret the world in both mechanical and purposive terms, to inquire into the workings of creation and to admire its beauty. He requires us to master the earth and to stand in humility before the mysteries surrounding us. The two tasks demand different dispositions, yet God asks for both at once. Can the two Adams achieve perfect reconciliation? Soloveitchik answers by the negative. The challenge comes precisely from the irreconcilability of the two, which must coexist without ever fusing into one. The task is not to evacuate or overcome the tension, but to identify with both Adams, knowing that they are and will always remain irreconcilable. We must embrace the two without abandoning ourselves fully to either. Now, Soloveitchik recognizes that modernity favors the Promethean Adam I at the expense of the devout Adam II. As he puts it, quote, contemporary Adam I refuses to pay earnest heed to the duality in man and tries to deny the undeniable, that another Adam exists beside, or rather in him. We build spaceships capable of reaching other planets but refuse the mystery of faith, erecting high and mighty towers of Babel without acknowledging the great verity that heaven is yet higher. End quote. In other words, in a modern world where innovation reigns supreme, finding the right balance between Adam I and Adam II becomes all the more difficult, and the task of Adam II becomes all the more important. Nonetheless, Soloveitchik believes that the Jewish community specifically is well positioned to resist the excesses and temptations of modern men, for it has long institutionalized the response to the hubris of Adam I, the Sabbath. What does Soloveitchik see in the Sabbath? Pretty much the same thing that Abraham Joshua Heschel sees in the Sabbath, namely a counterpoint to the excesses of modern Prometheanism, a refuge for Adam II in a world where Adam I has won. As Heschel puts it, the Sabbath represents the sanctification of time. It is, quote, a realm where the goal is not to have but to be, not to subdue but to be in accord. Heschel's language, which opposes the Sabbath to the language of Genesis 1, echoes the dialectic between the two Adams. In the Bible, the first use of the word kadosh, holy, happens in the book of Genesis at the end of the story of creation, quote, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. In Exodus, in the description of the Ten Commandments, the term holy is applied exactly once to refer to the Sabbath. For both Heschel and Soloveitchik, this is no coincidence. Quote, the Sabbath is a day on which we are called upon to share in what is eternal, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation. The Sabbath is such a prophetic institution because it seems to anticipate the triumph of Adam I over Adam II, the need for a weekly parenthesis in which innovation gives way to tradition, contemplation, and prayer. As Heschel puts it, quote, 6 days a week we wrestle with the world. 6 days a week we seek to dominate the world. On the seventh, we try to dominate the self. Yet Heschel adds that the Sabbath is not merely a counterpoint or an interlude that defines itself negatively in relation to a more substantive Prometheanism. As he puts it, quote, the Sabbath is not for the sake of the weekdays are for the sake of the Sabbath. It is not an interlude, but the climax of living. Recall that in Psalm 96, the Sabbath represents the world to come. It gives us quite literally a taste of heaven. Genesis 2 tells us that, quote, on the seventh day God finished his work, but it also tells us that on the seventh day God rested. How can that be? How can God create by resting? And if he does create something, what could that something possibly be? Heschel notes that the Hebrew word for rest, menuha, means more than mere withdrawal from labor or exertion, much more than freedom from toil, strain, or activity. Like the Sabbath itself, it is more than a negative concept. In Deuteronomy 12, Kings 8, and Ruth 1, menuha is equated with happiness and harmony. In Job 3, it's used as a synonym for eternal life in the world to come. All these passages convey a similar message. The point of the Sabbath, or of menuha, is not to find a way out of this world, but a way of being within and above this world, not to reject, but to surpass modern civilization. This, I want to suggest, is the task of modern conservatism. One need not be Jewish or even religious at all to appreciate the dialectic between the two atoms or the importance of the Sabbath, or menuha. From the rabbinic ambivalence towards innovation, at what's enthusiastic at the prospect of creation and fearful of it, all of us can derive a view of the human condition as a constant confrontation between two irreconcilable parts of us. On the one hand, humans are creators through and through, born to remake the world. On the other hand, the impulse to conquer, master, and rebuild requires a counterpoint to sustain itself. However impressive, the scientific mind of Adam I needs the humility and devotion of Adam II. Without the Promethean drive, our creative capacities atrophy, but without its counterpart, our spiritual sensibilities wither away. In both cases, to deny or ignore part of the human condition is to condemn oneself to unhappiness. The task of Jewish thought, Soloveitchik believes, is to oscillate between these two poles without ever letting one consume the other. In a modern world where science, technology, and innovation reign supreme, however, maintaining that balance requires defending everything that Adam II stands for: tradition, contemplation, prayer, mystery, humility, gratitude. Adam II, in some sense, is the first conservative. Like conservatism, he arises in response to something else, but stands for something substantive of his own. He represents an ideal to be cherished, an ideal that institutions like the Sabbath make concrete. Ultimately, that part of the Jewish tradition gives us a sense of the conservative mandate, but also of the means to that mandate. Thank you.